This LoreHound.com video is brought to you by...
Number 1, read the line.
You will behold the glory of my sacred wood.
That's not him.
Okay. Number 2, read the line.
You will behold the glory of my sacred wood.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Number 3.
You will behold the glory of my sacred wood.
That's him.
Every year, 1 in 5 gamers is accosted by an elf. We're tired of elves.
Greetings, viewers, and welcome to the Lorehound review of The Ball, a first-person spatial puzzle game developed by Swedish indie developer Teotl Studios and published by Tripwire, who you may know from that other Steam release, Tripwire of Killing Floor. Originally a game mod for Unreal Tournament 3, the prototype version won a crapload of awards in the Make Something Unreal contest, which included coming in second place overall. Now expanded, upgraded, and released as a standalone title, does it remain, shall we say, well-rounded? Why don't we find out? Our story begins at an archaeological dig on the site of an old volcano somewhere in 1940s Mexico. Wait a second, that's no mountain! It's a giant Mesoamerican pinball death trap, and you've fallen right into the middle of it. Not 50 feet above you are the rest of your team, who apparently need to call in the backup crane before they can come down and get you, which makes this the perfect time to go exploring by yourself instead of waiting patiently for rescue, right? Right. Okay, so they actually do tell you to go on ahead of them, but when is that ever a good idea? I mean, you could be living the posh life of a Chilean miner dining on tuna and milk whilst patiently waiting for rescue, but instead you choose the badly lit cave leading off into the distance and God knows what. So, as the archaeologist with the world's worst case of ADD, you decide to take a little stroll deeper into the mountain. It isn't long before you realize you're not in Cusco anymore, the environment around you transforming from crusty volcanic vent to ancient machines and oddly pristine ruins. You are quickly, almost haphazardly, introduced to the two tools that will get you through the rest of this journey, the hammer and the titular ball. As you will soon come to realize, these are artifacts of some significance, which make it all the stranger that they'd just kind of be laying out in the open for any old spelunker to find. As you might have guessed from the terminology, you never directly control the ball. Instead, you use the hammer, which is essentially a sort of pinball gun, to navigate it around the environment. Holding down the left mouse button for a second and then releasing it while next to the ball will send it hurtling forward. While holding down the right mouse button will use the magnetic force of the hammer to pull it back towards you. The cool part about this is that you don't have to be in a direct line of sight to retrieve the ball, alleviating what could have easily become the most frustrating aspect of the game. You merely need to point to where it is and have a method of guiding it back to where you want it to go. This is something that actually figures into some of the puzzles, and conveniently enough, there's always an indicator of where the ball is relative to your position in the lower left corner. Of course, that doesn't mean the ball itself isn't important. In tandem with the hammer, it can be tethered to other items, used to work switches, act as a shield, and take on any number of environmental properties, such as being covered in flammable oil or conducting electricity. It can even be used to kill monkeys. Yes, there's actually an achievement for that too. More practically, it can be used to fend off enemies, mostly of the strange critter or ancient mummified variety that intend to thwart your quest of aimlessly delivering the ball wherever it's intended to go. While this adds a little bit of tension to some of the scenarios, I never truly felt threatened by the hordes bearing down on me, and I wonder if it would have been better to leave combat out entirely. Dispatching baddies comes down to repeatedly shooting the ball outwards and or reeling it back in from behind them, thus squishing them, a mechanic that can be kind of fudged just by holding the ball in front of you and wiggling your mouse back and forth. A few tougher mini-boss types present themselves later in the game, but at least destroying those is often a matter of solving some sort of puzzle. In fact, while the game as a whole is solid, the final third is where things get the most interesting. Vistas become more impressive, game mechanics more dynamic, and you even get access to a vehicle I affectionately like to call the Ball Crusher. Sadly, it does a lot less crushing, and more shuttling you across dangerous terrain in some of the game's larger expanses. But, back to what you'll spend most of the game doing, which is solving a variety of environmental puzzles in order to move the ball towards the end of each level. By and large, they aren't super difficult, especially once you start decoding the game's lexicon, which is made up of visual hints and emblems that you'll see around each level that give you a good idea of where you're supposed to be going and what you're supposed to be doing. Generally, anything cast in blue is something you need to activate yourself. Anything cast in orange you'll need to hit or roll over with the ball. In addition, you'll have to knock boxes around with the hammer, and there are some situations where you're off by yourself navigating a jumping puzzle or trying to get to an area where the ball can't go. And this can prove a bit of a problem. While the controls are standard FPS fare, your little archaeologist fellow leaps forward with a specific amount of momentum, which means you'll have to remember judging your distance accordingly, or risk becoming Indiana Jambalaya in the pit of fire below. It's not game-breaking, but an odd quirk of design that doesn't really jive with the way everything else handles. Once again, despite a handful of devious puzzles in the golden final third of the game, they never reach the mind-bending heights of, say, one of its closest cousins, Portal. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, as it means the ball keeps up a good pace throughout, and you never feel as though you're getting hung up in one spot for too long. I was continually compelled to keep playing, and finished it in roughly 2, 3, or 4 hour sittings. Considering the average official playtime is about 8 hours for the campaign, I don't think that's so bad. And if that's not enough, you can go back and attempt speedruns, hunt for well-hidden idols which will reveal little bits of the story, complete various achievements, or spend a few more hours plowing through the game's survival mode, in which you use the ball and various traps around the environment to fend off waves of attackers in several different arenas themed on the levels of the campaign. Up until now, we haven't reviewed a whole lot here at Hound, and I'm not a big fan of the traditional number scale myself, so how should I end up rating it? Hopefully our words have some sway, but I've always thought of value as a good place to start. Quite simply, is the ball worth its $19.99 asking price on Steam? The short answer is a definitive yes. If you enjoy environmental puzzlers as much as I do, the ball is one of the most solid entries into the genre that I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Sure, there's a few things I could pick on. The environments are a little too static for me, especially early on, and outside of the ball itself there isn't much in the way of physics to consider. Enemies and objects just sort of gib into small, unsatisfying chunks. And though I certainly appreciate the use of Mesoamerican architecture, something we don't often see outside of, a Tomb Raider or Uncharted game every once in a while, the atmosphere never comes off as particularly memorable or nearly as charming as something like Portal. But to call back to a terrible pun I made at the beginning of this review, it is extremely well-rounded. This is one solid game. With the way the mechanics work, you'd expect to run into bugs and glitches all the time. Maybe the ball would get stuck somewhere, or fall into a pit of lava, never to be recovered. No, I can't think of one time in the game where things actually went wrong or I became irrevocably stuck. That, my friends, is quite an accomplishment in this day and age. The Ball is a great game, well made and well paced, with carefully designed puzzles and a highly unique concept. At $19.99, it's perhaps a tad high compared to some of its indie game brethren, but it still contains more interesting content than a lot of the modern $60 fare out there.